I'm having I've got a helper today. Mrs. C, ouch, she's helping me out. She likes to get attention when she's down here. Now that I've become a cat person, I didn't really set out to become a cat person. I just started throwing my scraps out in the backyard, and that was it. I became a cat person because, long story. What I want to do then is I kind of have gone through this real quick, whatever, kind of catch you up with what I'm doing. I have been working with some tubing. This looks like a spring, but it's actually tubing. This is, I think it's 2250, or it could be 2205. I think it's 2250 stainless. It is really hard stuff. This is 316 stainless, and this is 3/8 inch tubing. What would that be, like 7 millimeters, something like that? This is 1/4 inch tubing. This is, I think it's a 32nd wall. Is that a 16th wall? It's really, really strong stuff, stout stuff. And I've been having, I'm going through this idea of building a steam generator and playing around with different ideas. I've never done this before. This is a new project for me completely. So I'm kind of learning from the ground up. I repaired that for a person. That is anyway. If you know what that is, you know what it is. So, for this little project that I'm working on, which is to generate steam, I've made a little electric, little cat, what's your deal? What is your deal? There we go, let's get you up here. There you are. I made an electric pump so that I could like sort of get a foothold into this whole thing, because I wouldn't mind having this pump being operated by steam. However, I've got to get started, right? And I have a plan for all of this stuff. So this is basically going to be a bench pump. And it seems to work pretty good. It will be real easy to upgrade or change if I need. The way that I've built it, it's real open. I've got a little pressure relief on it, which may or may not work, we'll see. I have a pressure gauge, which I'll get all that stuff taken care of when the time comes. And right now I'm just running air lines. I'll change all that out. I have some high temperature silicone lines I can run, whatever. And I'm somewhat pleased with that. It seems to be working okay, but I haven't actually tested it with back pressure. So that's one of the next things I need to do. This dude is my second generation, let's call it that, prototype steam generator. My first generation steam generator is a real cute little gadget. And here it is over here, and there's my inlet and outlet, and that's like a lollipop shape, right? It's just sort of a flat spiral shape. I've got one over here. This is the very first one that I just bent that to see how it would bend. I did that by hand, and I made a bunch of mistakes, but I was just seeing what I had here. What I found was that for my purposes, I was having a hell of a time getting my flame to heat this thing evenly. And what I ended up doing was I ended up making a little chimney. Well, I can't really call it a venturi, but it would work somewhat like a venturi. As the air is heating and expanding and moving upwards, it's going to pull air in. So I had this little stack right here. This was my fuel inlet, and the stack kind of curves around and then goes into this little chamber that there's air above and below this little coil tube, and it's supposed to circulate around in a circular fashion, right? And it somewhat works, but not very well. I didn't know that I would be able to make a different type of steam generator tube, but that's what this gadget is for, and this is kind of the focus. Like I said, I'm just sort of doing an update. I made this in response to how tough it was to use a regular bender to create these bins, and they're pretty wide bins. And by the way, this stuff is extremely tough stuff. It is a lot stronger. Let me just show you the difference between this bent real easily. That took me about a minute or two to bend that thing, the whole thing, using this rig that I built. Well, I did the same, of course, with the same wheel that I have for my 1/4 inch, which I think I need to change the wheel. My 3/8 just got smashed, but I mean, this has got so much torque available that it was able to just smash that flat. There are uses for this flat curve like that. Basically, in a pressure gauge, I could make pressure gauges with that. I don't really want to, but this shape is much better in my opinion, because I can get a flame all the way up through here and through the top of this, and basically this thing that I have right here is the same thing I have here. I'm just showing you, I mean, it's basically the same thing. This one I think has a few less turns on it than this one does. The difference between the one I have mounted in here and this one is that I took a piece of sheet metal and I made it roughly a helix shape. It's really hard to do, by the way, by hand. And I fit it inside of here. That way the flame has to work its way around as it's going up. I wanted it to disperse the flame as evenly as I could in here. And to that end, I also put a little lid on the top of that little helix that I put in there. That's actually screwed to the top of the helix. Just a little bit of a baffle there to make sure that the heat is going to the outside of this assembly. Yeah, so there's that. Okay, that's the project. This is the tool that so far I've needed that has enabled me to build the proper steam generator, and I wanted to talk about this just for a few minutes. Now, I could have filmed all this, filming me building this. However, I don't know how important that is. If you want to build one of these things, you can look at what I've done and build one of these things. But I'll explain what's going on here real quickly. So, I have let's do it this way. I have my rough tubing that I'll just run it through here. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. So this is a bit of just a block to hold that tubing in place, and it needs to be pretty snug. I can get a piece of 3/8 tubing in there, but it has to hold it really tightly or you actually end up bending it. This little piece, well, let's do it this way. Let me do this. I mounted this metal plate, which is, by the way, a 5/16 inch thick metal plate, this piece here. So it's pretty robust. Let's tighten this up. I kind of like finding it when it has a curve in it, so that when I pull it tight, I'm able to pull it straight. So there's what I've got going on there. Let me show you how this works now. This is a weird design. I like it because it gives me the ability to bend different diameters if I so desire. I would probably put a different diameter of pipe around this. I would probably call that my smallest diameter. But what I've got here is I've got a 3-piece thing. So here's the first piece of this thing, which this holds my axis in place. And it allows me to to, let me show you what I've got here. So you can see that I've made that so it sits like that. This sets up above that. It is kind of loose. I mean, this is in progress. I was thinking about adding some sort of a wheel or a spacer on this side, but let me show you what I've got. Let me back it up again. Anyway, the thing is that I wanted to show you is that I'm able to bend a wider piece, and if I wanted to drill another hole, I could bend, whatever diameter I choose I want to bend, I can. So right now the diameter, I'm bending it around this pin here, but I have to have a way to hold this down to the pipe, because obviously if I try to bend it right now, it's just going to swing out to a point. It'll start bending it here now, because now I've got to the point where I mean, this is a point at which where it won't loosen any further. However, if I want to make it nice and tight, what I've done, if I can make this work, is that I have this piece, which is just a lever that I slide on to here, and now I've got the ability to hold this against that. I can make sure that this wheel is pressing the pipe up against this bar. This bar, by the way, is a hitch from a piece of heavy equipment. I found it on the highway, and I was riding my bike, and it was small enough. I took it home. I drilled it out to a 1/2 inch, so 12 millimeters roughly, and I've got a 1/2 inch bolt holding it in place here. If I wanted to make this taller, I could put a 1/2 inch stud in here and put another length of pin up here if I wanted to, whatever I want to do, and I can unbolt that, for that matter, and put a bigger pin in it. But let's get back to how this thing works. So I've shown you, let me do it this way. Let me try it. Let me try it here. You can't really see what's going on very well. I'll try it there though. Yeah. So in order for me to bend with this thing, I'll put my gloves on. Like I said, this piece, which is by the way a cut off of a socket, keeps my axle in place. And this allows me to bend it around. And this piece, and I pull these apart, and that pushes that wheel against the axle. So I kind of put pressure on these, and then roll that around like so. There we go. And you can see that, of course, you haven't bent this stuff, but I'm telling you, man, this is some really serious tubing. And if I'm building a longer, if I'm bending a longer piece, I'll have all my extras sort of in the coil here that I have to be able to maintain somehow. So it actually bends pretty nicely. Okay. So, and I can flip this over if I want to change my spacing, you know, for whatever. That's just kind of a handy thing. And yes, I know I need to work out my angle. What I'm thinking about doing is making a different platform that the cable sets, that the tubing sets on, so that it already has the proper angle as I'm turning it. That way I don't have this little issue here. But not a big deal though. None of this disappoints me whatsoever. And so that is extremely hard stuff to bend, and it bent like nothing, like that. So that's the deal behind this. Now that you've seen it work, let me run through my theory of this thing. So this pin is mounted on a piece of 5/16 thick steel. I mounted this steel just for, these are actually 1/4-inch screws, bugle head screws. They're just screwed in to this piece of 2x4, but as you can see, I just kind of cut this in so that it's holding in place pretty well. Then I used some angle iron to screw this to the table. That way I can get a lot of torque on it. Otherwise, I couldn't work with this thing. This needs to be held securely, and that's why it's held this way. But this is plenty of strength for it. So I've got all this held securely. Then I go back to this piece, which needs to be held securely too. If you don't hold this piece securely here, you can't. I mean, this has to be held, and it has to be held in a manner that it can't slide through, because it will try to. And that's what this does. You know, when I put this little piece on and then tighten it up down here, it actually locks it into this cylinder. The cylinder's just a little bigger than this 1/4-inch tubing. So if I do one for 3/8, I'll build another one of these, a bigger piece for the 3/8 tubing. But that's just a piece of pipe with a 1/4. It's a 1/2 13, yeah, a 1/2 inch 13 thread. But you can see that I just basically have this mounted on the side. I did it this way so that my welds over on these sides actually help hold this where it needs to be held. So these screws do hold it in place, but because the metal butts up against the side of this plate, it really holds this in place. And the thing was welded pretty decently, but I used my MIG welder to do all this stuff. Anyway, so just I picked an angle that would help pull this down. I wanted to make sure that I was pulling this down and to this side, and that's why there's an angle here. I could probably have gotten away with keeping it sideways, but you also notice the clearance that I have. I don't have much clearance the way I built this, so the edge, you know, the back of this gadget was getting stuck a little bit over here. Like I said, it's a minor deal, easy to work with. But that is all how this bottom piece works, like so. And again, this piece, this just holds, there's not really much stress, much pressure on this piece. That's why it's relatively lightly welded. But it holds everything in place, so this piece doesn't get away from you. And I put the tension on my tubing, you know, using this piece, which, again, let me just get her all lined up here. I'll attempt to. It may not want to line up for me, but yeah, there we go. Come on. Like I said, I did this at an angle so that if I want to, I can put this piece on this way too, and have, I just have a little bit more play. Pulling these apart, pulling these apart like that. See how I pull them apart? That's what locks that tube into that axle. So that's how this thing works. If you want to build one, I think, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to describe this thing for you so that if you want to build one, you can. I think that the only kind of dimensions I really worried about, other than making things really thick, was that I kept my axle, my center, see, you can see my axle running through here. I kept it so that that wheel runs just a little past 90 degrees this way. That way, it's not trying to squeeze out, right? It's not trying to push its way out. For instance, if I were to put it up a little bit, like that wheel was up here, when I would be pulling this around here, I'm actually putting stress on it that I don't need. Right now the stress is just between the wheel and the pin. If I have it centered up higher, centered back here, it's going to want to put stress going in this direction or this direction, which means that I probably have to make this thing stronger, which I could. But anyway, that was really kind of my only consideration, other than the ability to make a large, because I've got the ability to make a larger diameter, whatever diameter I want. Although if I get into a really large diameter, I'll have to drill holes, move this thing back. No big deal. And I could also move it on the other side, whatever I want to do. It's not a big deal, but it's something to take into consideration. Once it's being held, though, if I'm winding, like I'm winding, let's say the lollipop idea, like a concentric circle that goes wider and wider, I could actually bring it up above all this fitting here, and then I could start winding it wider, just staying in a straight line, not wrapping it on top of each other, but wrapping it out. But to do that, I'm going to need a wheel that will be able to hold the outer winding right up next to the inner winding. So that wheel's going to have to be a lot deeper, because it's going to be aligning the top and the bottom. Does that make any sense? I hope so. That's the best I've got. So anyway, let me put this all back here. So there's my overview of what I've got with my little monster bender, which is really, it works great. And like I said, it gives me the flexibility to do a lot of different types of bending. Not only that, but if I want to do, a sharp bend and, make a pipe a certain direction, like I want to make a bend that goes 90 to the left and then I want to bend it to go up. If I plan it out, I can do that here too. I just have to make sure that I'm doing it properly. And of course, if I have a bend that's too tight, if I put a sharp bend on this and this side of this, well, then this piece ends up stuck. But there are workarounds for all of that stuff. The idea, though, is that this is actually a nice little tool, and although it's pretty specialized, you're only going to use it if you're bending something that you want to bend very tightly and accurately, and for that matter, something that resembles the thickness of this 2250 stainless tubing and the strength of it. That's going to help you out a lot. So I think that my update is done. So I've just given you an idea of what I'm doing here, so you probably understand what's going on here. I do need to put my insulation in here above the bottom and top cap. I'm going to do that today. Yeah, my pieces of brass are holding up great. At some point, I'm going to start melting some of this stuff down because I want to cast my own brass water pump.